A few months ago, this channel posted a video arguing that the four Chaos Gods were fundamentally reactive, that they work by amplifying existing human failings rather than imposing their own agenda from outside. Khorne doesn't invent war. He feeds on wars mortals are already fighting. Nurgle doesn't create disease. He inflates the suffering already woven into biological life. Every mutation, every corruption, every fall from grace in the lore traces back to something that already existed in the mortal soul. The Chaos Gods, the argument ran, were the most sophisticated parasitic system in fiction. Not generals, not architects. The support class, indispensable to the war effort, but dependent on the host for the raw material of their power. The most upvoted reply on that video quoted something attributed to J.R.R. Tolkien. The line circulates everywhere in lore discussion. Evil can't create anything new. They can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. 296 people liked it. The commenter used it to argue the support class framework was just the Tolkien rule restated in 40K terms, and they were right to like it, because the principle it describes is real. That exact wording, though, isn't a direct Tolkien quote. It's a paraphrase. So, embedded in fandom discourse, it drifted from its source into the shape of a famous line, eventually codified by TV tropes as the "evil is sterile" trope. What Tolkien actually wrote appears in multiple places. In The Return of the King, the Tower of Cirith Ungol chapter carries the sentiment plainly. The shadow can only mock. It can't make real new things of its own. Morgoth's ring elevates it into a cosmological law, that Melkor could create nothing possessing life of its own, not after his rebellion before the beginning. The principle is genuine Tolkien. The viral quote is a compression. The distinction matters here because one is a statement about a specific in-universe character, and one is a statement about the metaphysical architecture of evil itself. In Warhammer 40K, the principle maps onto the four major powers in a way that feels cosmological rather than incidental. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh. Each arose from pre-existing mortal emotional states amplified to catastrophic extremes. Khorne from bloodshed that already existed in mortal nature. Nurgle from despair and biological decay that already existed. Tzeentch from ambition, from the hunger for change, from the scheming that already lived in every sentient mind that ever wanted something it didn't have. Slaanesh, most literally of all, born from the collective excess of the Eldari civilization, a god born not by inventing a new form of evil, but by absorbing an existing one until it consumed its creator. Games Workshop never published a canonical statement saying, "Chaos can only corrupt, not create." But the design truth embedded in the origin of every major power is functionally identical. They are reflections of what mortals already were, dark mirrors, not inventors. That was the 296 like comments argument, correctly stated. But there was a second reply that got 38 likes, and that's the one that broke the argument open. That commenter named three exceptions: Vashtorr the Artifice, the Iron Warriors, and the Dark Mechanicum. They argued that if those three are real, the Tolkien rule isn't the unbreakable law of chaos the prior video had implied. They were right. What follows is why that matters, not just philosophically, but strategically, in terms of what the Imperium is currently equipped to fight. Games Workshop first teased Vashtorr during a Warhammer Day preview livestream on October 8, 2022. His fuller canonical introduction came November 19th of that year, when GW's lore team provided details. His first narrative appearance was in Arks of Omen, Abaddon, released January 2023. He received his own campaign volume, Arks of Omen, Vashtorr, in March 2023. The first thing to establish is what Vashtorr actually is, because his classification is genuinely unusual within the setting's taxonomy of chaos entities. He isn't a demon prince, no mortal origin, no fall from grace, no soul bartered to a patron god. He isn't one of the four major powers or any emanation of them. He's what GW's own commercial copy describes as a demonic demigod of unrestrained invention and abominable artifice. The Lexicanum entry calls him a demigod of inventors, engineers, scientists, and artisans. The Warhammer community introduced him to the public with a specific phrase that shouldn't be read past without pausing: a demon unlike any other. His origin is the critical structural detail. Vashtorr serves chaos undivided and, in GW's own words from Arks of Omen, Abaddon, claims to have no connection to any of the four major chaos gods, having come into existence independently in the warp as a result of mortals' obsessive pursuit of technological innovation at all costs, especially inventions that resulted in unexpected and terrible consequences. He is neither a formerly mortal demon prince nor an entity emanating from the Big Four. His own Warhammer 40K fandom wiki entry states it plainly. He has his own sphere of influence different from theirs. Some in-universe scholars claim he was created during the reckless arms race of some ancient galaxy-spanning war. Others tie him to the horrors of the dark age of technology. Still others argue he was empowered by specific technological events: the biotransference of the Necrons, the cursed founding, the creation of Primaris space marines. The pattern these events share isn't emotion, it's fabrication, mortal civilizations building things that shouldn't exist, pushing knowledge past the point where conscience could follow. Vashtorr arose from the desire to make things that didn't already exist. That phrase isn't community analysis or paraphrase. It appears in GW's own characterization of his domain. The four chaos gods embody what mortals already feel. Vashtorr embodies what mortals compulsively do: build, invent, push past every boundary that might have protected them. The Warhammer Community Sculpting article from March 2023 establishes more than promotional flavor. Designer Steven describes Vashtorr as not an ascended mortal but a wholesale machine demon, drawn from demon engines, obliterators, the Hellbrute, but categorically distinct from them. The design instruction was to represent a being that is neither flesh nor machine, in any conventional sense. It should be impossible to tell where one part ends and another begins. Flesh stretched over mechanical components, pistons and joints built to look anatomical, wings primarily for show because, as Steven writes with obvious awareness of what he's describing, what demigod doesn't have wings? He is the master of the Forge of Souls, the colossal metaphysical foundry deep in the formless wastes where blind, ever-mutating demon craftsmen work the fires, where the bellows are manned by nightmare creatures, where demons come to be fused with mechanical bodies and become soul grinders, emerging on the ash plains outside after dueling each other for the privilege. Vashtorr sits at the center of all of it, arms dealer for the entire great game, too useful to any of the four gods for any of them to move against him. Now consider what Vashtorr has actually made. An honest reading of the available sources requires distinguishing what's confirmed from what's debated. The most documented original creation is the flesh metal gangliaxos, cybernematodes, essentially metal living veins, that connect the insides of a space hulk to all its different ships and parts. These organisms thread through the bones of a space hulk, enslaving every viable mechanical system they encounter, converging into a unified demonic control nexus. They're not corrupted from anything recognizable. They are original biological mechanical organisms, engineered for a specific function that had no prior template in the lore. The dissonance engine is the next confirmed design. Built into the crust of Wormwood, the mechanical planet Vashtorr assembled from the ruins of Caliban in the Somnium Stars, the dissonance engine was the terminal device of the entire campaign. At the Battle of Idolatros on April 25, 2023 in release terms, GW's Warhammer Community Spoiler article confirmed what it did. Vashtorr activated it, tore a massive hole in reality tunneling directly into the webway where the lock was hidden, and then phased the entire planet of Wormwood through the rift. With a flash, Wormwood was swallowed into a maelstrom of silver light, taking with it Vashtorr and the battered traitor fleet. The wound in reality left behind is described as eerie, semi-visible, something appalling to behold. The lion came back. Angron was banished. None of it stopped any of this. The Arks of Omen themselves require a specific caveat. They were built around pre-existing space hulks, amalgamated wrecks claimed from the warp. Vashtorr didn't generate the raw material from nothing. The Lexicanum uses the word designed. The fandom wiki uses transformed. Whether that constitutes invention or radical modification is genuinely debatable in the lore, and this script isn't going to paper over that tension. Even granting the most conservative reading, that the Space Hulk chassis was modified rather than created, the systems Vashtorr installed have no prior referent in Imperial or Chaos fleet doctrine. The gangly axos, the captive warp portal configurations. The chassis was inherited. Everything that made it dangerous was original. The Arks themselves are worth spending a moment on, not as engineering objects, but as strategic instruments. The Lexicanum campaign record lists over 20 named Arks, each commanded by a Chaos Lord, each accompanied by a Bale fleet. The Ark Stygian Heart carried enough conventional vessels to conquer an entire sector, plus ship-sized demon engines. The Ark Colossus carried a full complement of traitor titans. The Ark Bloodmaw depopulated entire planets. Each one carried a captive warp portal that enabled rapid simultaneous strikes across multiple fronts. A tactical capability that forced the Imperium to defend everywhere at once without being able to predict where the next fragment of the key would be retrieved. The Lexicanum's campaign info box records the outcome simply: Strategic Chaos Victory. The key activated. One operational detail that defines Vashtorr's character in the lore deserves attention before moving on. Unlike every other significant Chaos entity, he doesn't deceive. The Warhammer Community article introducing him is titled, "The Most Honest Demon You'll Ever Meet." The Lexicanum confirms he rarely lies or conceals his true objectives, and establishes explicit contracts with clear terms and conditions. His words to Abaddon in Arks of Omen, Abaddon, are explicit. "Trust me for but a few short hours more, and in return I will give you the key to unlock final and absolute victory." He told Abaddon exactly what he wanted. He told him exactly what he was offering. He delivered. The Archiphane's power comes from the transaction itself, from the moment the deal is struck and the machine wakes. Deception is Tzeentch's domain. Vashtorr's offer is always the tool itself. The 38-like comment named two other examples alongside Vashtorr: the Iron Warriors and the Dark Mechanicum.
These are the right examples, but the argument they support is more specific than simply they were also creating. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors. is described in GW sources as a grim warrior and master of technological arcana, who wielded logic and the mathematics of warfare as keenly as he did a blade and bolter. He ascended to demonhood after the Horus heresy, bitter and feeling marginalized by the Imperium he had spent a life serving. His genius for siege mathematics, his mastery of fortification and its destruction, his capacity to calculate where a wall would break before the first blow fell, these were Primarch traits he carried with him when he fell. The Iron Warriors' dominance of siege warfare made them the Traitor Legion most naturally associated with mechanical innovation and demon engine development. Their relationship with the Dark Mechanicum is deep and documented. Their presence among the forces assaulting the Rock in Arks of Omen Vashtorr isn't incidental. Vashtorr's Bale fleet specifically included Iron Warriors alongside his own cult of the Artifice. But Perturabo's creativity predates his fall. The argument that the Iron Warriors break the Tolkien rule as a chaos entity runs into the complication that his inventive capacity is what he brought to chaos. It isn't what chaos gave him. That distinction matters for the thesis. What chaos received when it got Perturabo was a creative mind it didn't manufacture. Chaos inherited genius rather than generating it. The Dark Mechanicum is the cleaner institutional case. They are heretics, corrupted tech priests who fled Mars during or after the Horus heresy, or were turned thereafter, and they operate without the STC restrictions that govern loyal Mechanicus doctrine. The standard Adeptus Mechanicus doctrine treats the sacred standard template constructs as the boundary of legitimate technology. Derivation from STC knowledge is holy, deviation from it's heresy. The Dark Mechanicum has no such restriction. They served as Vashtorr's workforce for the Arks project, described in GW's own canonical sources as his primary collaborators in construction. But their relationship with Vashtorr ends at transactional deals. He isn't their master, he is their best client. The Lexicanum is specific on this point. Vashtorr's involvement with the Dark Mechanicum and Iron Warriors ends at transactional deals. The point the 38-like comment was reaching for is this. Creation in chaos wasn't something Vashtorr introduced in October 2022. The lore had been building toward it for years. What Vashtorr provides is a domain. Before him, the Dark Mechanicum's innovations existed without a presiding chaos entity to claim them as power. Before him, Perturabo's genius existed as a tragic character trait without a warp reflection. Vashtorr isn't the first inventor in the orbit of chaos. He is the first warp entity for whom invention is the mechanism of his power. The way bloodshed feeds Khorne, the way despair builds Nurgle's domain. The 38-like comment caught something real. What it didn't articulate, and what this argument attempts to name, is the structural consequence. That the codification of invention into a chaos domain changes what the enemy is. The series ran from January to April 2023, 5 or 6 books, depending on how the campaign supplements are counted. Arks of Omen, Abaddon set the stage, establishing the alliance between Vashtorr and Abaddon and the nature of the key. Arks of Omen, Angron brought the Red Angel crashing through Indomitus Crusade Fleet Quartus at Malakbale. Arks of Omen, Vashtorr saw the direct assault on the Rock, the floating fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, carrying a key fragment deep in its ancient systems. Arks of Omen, Farsight widened the campaign's scope. Arks of Omen, the Lion closed it.
GW framed the series as the most significant narrative expansion since the epical Gathering Storm. That's a significant benchmark to invoke. The Gathering Storm introduced Guilliman's return and the birth of the Great Rift. GW was consciously positioning the Arks of Omen campaign at the same tier of lore consequence. The Vashtorr book's assault on the Rock is worth dwelling on. Vashtorr had previously negotiated with an abominable intelligence. a machine intelligence of the kind the Imperium has classified as forbidden since the Men of Iron Rebellion, to locate the rock. The rock is one of the most heavily defended locations in the entire Imperium, a mobile asteroid fortress, the remnant of the shattered planet Caliban, home to one of the most secretive space marine chapters in existence. Vashtorr launched a direct assault on it. He nearly succeeded. The Lexicanum details the sequence. Vashtorr bypassed the rock's void shields using techno-sorcery and cut through its defenses until Be'lakor, his rival, another independent chaos entity with no love for the Archiphane's growing ambitions, intervened from within the rock's systems, stalling the assault long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Vashtorr fought Be'lakor to a standstill in a duel where shadow sorcery met demonic technological command. It ended in a tactical retreat, not a defeat. The Lexicanum records it as Vashtorr telling Abaddon that not all was lost, because he had extracted the energy signatures and data he needed from the Tucholcha engine, the key fragment deep within the rock, even without physically removing it. Then he rebuilt Caliban. The Dark Angel's original homeworld was destroyed during the Horus Heresy. Vashtorr gathered its ruins from the warp, assembled them into a mechanical planet at the edge of the Somnium stars, and named it Wormwood. The surface, cogs and chimneys, twisted iron forests, every visible sign of dark industry. When the Unforgiven fleet arrived, their cogitators confirmed it was real. Grand Master Azrael, the newly Primaris ascended Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, ordered his fleet into the attack in what the GW spoiler article describes as a state of profound spiritual outrage. It was a trap and also a message. The key itself is worth understanding. The Lexicanum describes it as an artifact of Old One's technology, which allows for the accessing of the lock, and with it a device of unimaginable power. The Old Ones predate the current Chaos Gods. Their technology is pre-warp corruption, built before the Imperium was the hostile psychic ocean it has since become. The key was lost since their era. Vashtorr identified it, tracked its fragments across the galaxy using the Arks and their captive warp portals, reassembled it, and activated it. No other chaos entity in the current era has demonstrated the technological comprehension to work with Old One's artifacts. That isn't incidental to his domain. It's the demonstration of what his domain actually means at its ceiling. The broader narrative thread that some in the community have labeled the Dark King development refers to the emerging implication that the 41st millennium is becoming a setting where a fifth power might genuinely crystallize. The Horus Heresy short story, The Dark King, predates Vashtorr by over a decade in real-world terms. But Vashtorr's campaign, his stated goal of apotheosis, and GW's own language, the four ruinous powers don't have a monopoly on godhood, constitute the clearest signal GW has sent that the mythological architecture of chaos is being actively expanded. Whether that expansion resolves as a fifth chaos god, as something stranger, or as a narrative thread that takes another decade to develop, is genuinely unknown from current sources.
What can be said is that GW ran a multi-book, galaxy-spanning campaign, let the villain win, moved him into Old One's territory, and kept calling him a demon unlike any other throughout. That isn't accidental world building. To understand what Vashtorr breaks, you need to understand what the Imperium built its defenses to stop. Geller fields project a bubble of real space around a ship in warp transit.
The lexicanum is explicit about their function. They protect from the predation of warp entities and work by projecting a field of real space around the ship, making it harder for demonic entities to materialize aboard. The threat model embedded in that design is incursion, something trying to get from the warp into the material universe by penetrating the ship's hull. The field stands between the Imperium and the crew. The danger is assumed to be outside, pressing in. Vashtorr's weapons are physical objects. The Arks of Omen are ships that operate in real space. The flesh-metal gangliaxos are biological mechanical organisms that exist materially once installed. They burrowed through the hulls of space hulks and bred there. The dissonance engine was built into the geological crust of a material planet in the Somnium stars. None of these require breaching a Geller field. They were already in the real before the Imperium knew to look for them. The threat model for a Geller field does not apply to technology born in the warp and manufactured into physical form. Geller fields ask the right question for the wrong war. Purity seals function as markers of freedom from corruption. The lexicanum describes them as indicating that the wearer is free of corruption. The operative concept in that framing is corruption, meaning a thing that has been twisted from its original form by chaos. A purity seal diagnoses deviation from an original state. A weapon or device that was originated by chaos rather than corrupted from an imperial template presents a genuinely different diagnostic challenge. The seal has no obvious theological or procedural category for an object that has never been imperial equipment at any point in its existence. There is no original state to compare against. There is no point of deviation to identify, because there was no prior purity. The Ordo Malleus states its mandate in canonical sources. It concerns itself with the constant threat of demonic incursion and chaos corruption. Two categories: incursion, entities entering the material plane; corruption, existing people, objects, or institutions being twisted from their original form. The Grey Knights, the Ordo's militant arm, are described as conditioned specifically against the corrupting influence of chaos. Their mental architecture and extensive psychic conditioning assume the attack comes as corruption working inward on an existing mind. Every layer of their training assumes an enemy that finds weakness and amplifies it. An entity that offers explicit contracts, delivers engineered tools, and operates on transactional rather than parasitic principles isn't the threat profile they were built to recognize or resist. The Adeptus Mechanicus presents the starkest case. Their entire doctrinal framework revolves around one question about any piece of technology. Is this derived from the sacred standard template constructs? If yes, it's orthodox. If no, it's heresy. That is a provenance question. It asks about the ancestry of a device. A system built by Vashtorr from demonic flesh metal with no imperial design lineage doesn't answer the STC question. It doesn't fail the question. It doesn't pass it. It arrives from outside the category system entirely. The Mechanicus's heresy detection apparatus was calibrated for a galaxy where the fundamental dichotomy was sacred versus corrupted sacred. Vashtorr represents a third option: technology with no sacred origin to corrupt in the first place.
This argument is a structural inference from how these systems are described in canonical lore, not a statement that GW has written a scene where an Inquisitor explicitly discovers this gap. What can be said is that every defense layer described in canonical sources was built to address a corrupting force working inward on existing imperial material. and Vashtorr's operational pattern, as documented across the Arks of Omen campaign and the post-campaign Ark novel, doesn't fit that threat model as described. Whether the Imperium has recognized this in-universe is a narrative question GW is still developing. The structural gap is there regardless. There's a mirror worth examining on the Loyalist side, even if it's imperfect. Belisarius Cawl, Archmagos Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, is described in GW's own wiki as having invented dozens of weapons, uncovered scores of STC databases, and quested for knowledge across the galaxy. The Warhammer Community Sculpting article for Vashtorr's miniature notes almost as an aside that designer Stephen was also involved in creating another mashup of man and machine, and names Cawl specifically. GW placed these two figures in the hands of the same designer in the same article. Cawl created the Primaris Space Marines. The Rubicon Primaris process, the enhancement suite, the biological mechanical upgrades involved, whether this constitutes recovery of lost STC knowledge or genuine invention with no confirmed STC precursor, is a live debate within the fiction. Elements of the Martian priesthood have called his activities heresies. He is too powerful and too productive to suppress. He operates outside the approved framework of his own institution and remains indispensable. Sound familiar? Both Cawl and Vashtorr sit at the boundary between technological recovery and genuine invention. Both are feared or resented by their own institutional hierarchies. Both are untouchable precisely because of their utility to the larger war effort. And according to the novel Archmagos, Vashtorr staged an entire military operation. Iron Warriors Warsmith Kravarek, the Dark Mechanicum Disciples of Null sect, a fake binding ritual, an army of soul grinders attacking Ulvheim, specifically to maneuver Cawl onto a battlefield. Not to destroy him, to influence him. The Archiphane's true objective, confirmed when he revealed the ruse to Kravarek afterward: direct contact with the Imperium's most dangerous inventor. What does an entity defined by invention want with the Imperium's most dangerous inventor? GW hasn't answered that yet. But they've asked the question in canon, and the question itself is more significant than any answer the lore hasn't yet provided. GW has placed the galaxy's most dangerous inventor on the Chaos side, and the galaxy's most dangerous inventor on the Loyalist side, in direct contact, in a novel published under their own Black Library imprint. Both sides of the Long War now have an entity defined by creation rather than corruption, recovery, or the grinding doctrinal orthodoxy that has characterized 10,000 years of the conflict. The war's shape is changing. That's a harder claim to prove than Vashtorr's specific domain, but the pieces GW has placed suggest a direction. Right now, Vashtorr is somewhere beyond the webway's outermost defenses, applying his comprehension of all machine languages across all of galactic history to a vault sealed by the Old Ones before the Chaos Gods existed. The key is complete. He brought an entire mechanical planet through a rift in reality to reach it. The Lexicanum campaign record is unambiguous. Strategic chaos victory. The key activated. The Imperium defeated Angron. Lion L. Johnson returned from 10,000 years of whatever sleep he had been kept in. They lost anyway. GW's framing for what comes next, if Vashtorr reaches the lock, is their own. He returns not as a demigod arms dealer, not as a daemon lord operating in the margins of the great game, but as the fifth chaos god, the god of dark artifice, a domain with no prior occupant, calibrated for no existing imperial defense. GW's writing on Vashtorr is still early innings. Era of Ruin has added Vashtorr's operations in the Nephilim sector and the Cawl maneuver, but his full domain and ultimate capabilities remain in development. This is the strongest current reading of the available lore, not a settled verdict. GW may take a decade to follow through on the thread they've started,
but the structural break is already in the canon. A warp entity defined by invention exists. His creations are operating in real space. The four most cited layers of Imperium chaos defense, Geller fields, purity seals, Ordo Malleus doctrine, Mechanicus heresy detection, were each designed to manage a force that corrupts existing matter. The principle that chaos corrupts rather than creates was never a stated rule. It was a design premise so foundational that no one in the fiction interrogated it, because there had been nothing to prompt the interrogation. Vashtorr is that prompt. The next 10,000 years of the 41st millennium won't look like the last 10,000. One of the fundamental rules of this conflict has been broken. The Imperium doesn't yet know what kind of enemy it's now fighting. If you have a counter-argument, a case for why Vashtorr still fits within the Tolkien rule, or why the Imperium's doctrine already accounts for him, or why the structural break described here is overstated, drop it below. Strong counter-arguments get the next video. The first 31x outlier on this channel came from a comment thread. The second one might come from yours. Subscribe if you want to be here when it does.